9 elite special operations units from across the NATO alliance, each one the absolute best their nation produces. Each one trained in infiltration, evasion, and covert operations. Each one confident they could penetrate any defensive position undetected. They were given 72 hours to complete a single objective: infiltrate a defended compound, extract critical intelligence, and exfiltrate without being detected. The rules were simple. Detection meant mission failure. No second chances. No partial credit. Succeed invisibly or fail completely. What happened over those 3 days shocked NATO command and forced a complete reassessment of how Western Special Operations Forces approach stealth doctrine. 8 of the 9 units failed. Some failed within hours. Some failed within sight of the objective. Some failed during exfiltration when they thought the mission was complete. Only 1 unit completed the exercise without a single detection, and the reason they succeeded while everyone else failed has nothing to do with superior equipment, superior physical conditioning, or superior individual talent. It has to do with something far more fundamental that most modern special operations training has slowly forgotten. By the end of this video, you will understand why the best funded, best equipped special operations forces in the world were outperformed by a unit whose stealth doctrine was written in the jungles of Malaya 70 years ago. And the lesson applies far beyond military operations. Exercise Silent Phantom. Location classified, but the terrain profile matches the Scottish Highlands combined with dense coniferous forest typical of Scandinavian training areas. The exercise was designed to evaluate NATO special operations stealth capabilities in a contested environment with sophisticated detection systems. 9 units participated: United States Delta Force, United States Navy SEALs, German KSK, French GIGN, Polish GROM, Norwegian FSK, Canadian JTF-2, Dutch KCT, and the British Special Air Service. Each unit fielded a 4-man team. Each team received identical intelligence packages. Each team had the same 72-hour window. The objective compound was defended by a dedicated opposing force equipped with thermal imaging, ground sensors, acoustic monitoring, drone surveillance, and human observation posts. This was not a simple training exercise. This was a comprehensive evaluation of which NATO forces could actually move undetected through a modern sensor-rich environment. Before I walk you through what happened, I need to explain why this exercise matters so much, because the results have implications that reach far beyond military bragging rights. Modern warfare has undergone a fundamental transformation in the past 2 decades. Sensors are everywhere. Thermal imaging can detect body heat from kilometers away. Acoustic sensors can identify human footsteps. Ground pressure sensors can detect movement across entire sectors. Drone surveillance provides persistent overhead coverage. The battlefield has become transparent in ways that would have seemed like science fiction to soldiers of previous generations. In this environment, traditional infantry tactics become suicide. You cannot mass forces without being detected. You cannot approach defended positions using conventional movement techniques. The only forces that can operate effectively are those that have mastered true invisibility, not the invisibility of technology, though technology helps. The invisibility of technique, discipline, and doctrine refined over decades of operational experience. This is what Silent Phantom was designed to test. Not which unit had the best equipment. Not which unit had the fittest operators. Which unit could actually disappear. The exercise began at 2,200 hours on a Thursday evening. All 9 teams were inserted at different points along a perimeter approximately 15 kilometers from the objective compound. They had 72 hours to infiltrate, complete the intelligence extraction, and reach their designated exfiltration points. The opposing force knew teams were coming. They did not know from which directions. They did not know exactly when. Their job was to detect and track any approaching team. A team was considered compromised if the opposing force could identify their position within a 100-meter grid square. The detection did not need to be visual. Thermal signature, acoustic detection, sensor activation, any confirmed identification meant mission failure. Let me tell you what happened to each team, because the pattern of failures reveals something crucial about how different nations approach stealth operations. And what you will see is that the failures were not random. They were systematic. They reflected doctrinal choices made years or decades earlier that determined outcomes before the exercise even began. The first team to fail was one of the American units. I will not specify which one because the lesson applies to both. They failed at hour 11. The cause of detection was thermal signature during a rest halt. Here is what happened. The team had covered approximately 6 kilometers through dense forest. Excellent pace. They were ahead of schedule. They established a concealed position to rest and conduct map study. Standard operating procedure. Reasonable decision, but they made a critical error that American Special Operations Doctrine does not adequately address. When you stop moving in a cold environment, your body continues radiating heat. If you have been exerting yourself, you are radiating significant heat. Modern thermal imaging systems can detect this heat differential against the ambient environment from considerable distance. The team had moved aggressively, generating body heat. When they stopped, they became thermal beacons visible to the drone surveillance that passed overhead during their rest halt. Detection confirmed. Mission failed. 11 hours and 14 kilometers from the objective. The operators were furious. They had done everything right according to their training. They had maintained noise discipline, they had used available cover. They had moved tactically, but their training had not emphasized thermal signature management during halts. Their doctrine assumed either continuous movement or established concealment positions with thermal screening. The exercise parameters denied them the latter. They adapted to the exercise. They did not adapt to the physics. The German KSK team failed at hour 19. Their detection was acoustic. The German operators were exceptionally professional. Their movement technique was excellent, but they made a decision that reflected their training environment, and it cost them the mission. They chose a route that required crossing a rocky streamed logic with sound. The streamed provided a natural avenue of approach with good concealment from visual observation. The problem was the acoustic sensor array positioned downstream. Every footstep on wet rock produces sound. The sound travels through water far more efficiently than through air. The acoustic sensors detected rhythmic patterns consistent with human movement. Detection confirmed. Mission failed. The German team never knew they had been compromised. They continued moving toward the objective believing they were undetected. In a real operation, they would have walked into an ambush. They failed because their training had emphasized visual and thermal concealment without equal emphasis on acoustic signature management. The French GIGN team lasted until hour 26. They were detected during an obstacle crossing. The team needed to traverse a ridgeline that offered no concealed route around it. They chose to cross at night during a period of reduced drone activity. Reasonable tactical decision. But the ridge was lined with ground pressure sensors buried beneath the surface. These sensors were not visible. Their presence was not indicated in the intelligence package because in a real operation, you do not always know where sensors are positioned. The French team walked directly over the sensor array. Detection confirmed. Mission failed. The frustration in the after-action debrief was palpable. The French operators argued that the sensors were impossible to detect and therefore impossible to avoid. This argument missed the point entirely. The SAS team, as you will see, crossed the same ridge. They were not detected. The difference was not luck. The difference was technique. The Polish GROM team failed at hour 31. Their detection was visual. A human observation post identified movement during a period of low light. The Polish operators were moving through a tree line approximately 300 meters from the observation post. They believed the darkness provided adequate concealment. They were wrong. The observation post was equipped with night vision devices that the Polish team had not adequately accounted for in their movement pattern. They silhouetted against a slightly lighter background for approximately 4 seconds. That was enough. Detection confirmed. Mission failed. The Norwegian FSK team presented an interesting case. They failed at hour 34, and their failure illustrated a subtle but critical point about stealth doctrine. The Norwegian team was exceptionally skilled in Arctic movement. They had incorporated excellent thermal management techniques. They avoided acoustic signatures effectively. They failed because of scent. The defensive perimeter included dogs, military working dogs trained to detect human presence. The Norwegian team had moved upwind of a dog patrol. Their scent carried, the dogs alerted. The patrol investigated. Detection confirmed. Mission failed. The Norwegian operators had not considered scent discipline as a primary detection vector. Their doctrine emphasized environmental factors relevant to Arctic operations where extreme cold reduces scent propagation in the moderate climate of the exercise area. Scent carried farther than their experience suggested. The Canadian JTF-2 team lasted until hour 41. They failed during the approach to the objective itself. They had successfully navigated the outer perimeter. They had avoided the sensor arrays, the observation posts, the drone surveillance. They were within 500 meters of the compound when they were detected by a ground surveillance radar system covering the final approach. The radar detected movement consistent with crawling humans. Detection confirmed. Mission failed.
The Canadian team was devastated. They had done almost everything right. 41 hours of successful infiltration destroyed in the final approach. But the lesson was crucial. The final approach to any defended objective is the most dangerous phase. Security increases exponentially as you near the target. The techniques that work at 15 kilometers do not work at 500 meters. The Canadian doctrine had not adequately distinguished between deep infiltration and close target reconnaissance. The Dutch KKT team failed at hour 47. They actually reached the objective compound. They extracted the intelligence. They began exfiltration believing the mission was complete. They were detected 3 kilometers into their withdrawal. The cause was a tracking drone that had been launched in response to a suspected sensor. Activation hours earlier, the drone had been methodically searching a sector. The Dutch team entered that sector during their exfiltration. Thermal detection during movement. Mission failed. This failure illustrated perhaps the most important lesson of the entire exercise. The mission is not complete until you reach the exfiltration point. The Dutch team had relaxed their discipline slightly during the withdrawal. Their movement rate increased, their thermal signature increased, their vigilance decreased. These marginal changes were enough. In the words of the exercise controller, they celebrated before the finish line. The second American team failed at hour 52. Like the Canadians, they reached the objective. Like the Dutch, they were detected during exfiltration, but their failure was different. They were detected by a human observation post that spotted their movement across an open area. The American team had successfully used that same open area during infiltration by crossing during a narrow window when no observation was possible. During exfiltration, they assumed the same window would apply. Defensive patterns had shifted. The observation post had repositioned. The Americans did not conduct adequate reconnaissance before the crossing. They applied a previous template to a changed situation. Detection confirmed. Mission failed. 8 teams, 8 failures, each failure reflecting specific doctrinal gaps, training assumptions, or technique deficiencies. And through all of this, the British SAS team was still moving. If you are finding this analysis valuable and want to understand how different elite forces approach tactical problems, hit subscribe right now. Next week I am releasing a video about why certain NATO forces consistently outperform others in specific domains, and the historical reasons behind these differences will surprise you. But right now, let me tell you what the SAS did differently, because this is where the exercise transforms from a competition into a masterclass in stealth doctrine. The SAS team took longer to begin their infiltration. While other teams were already kilometers into their approach, the SAS spent the first 3 hours in their insertion point, observing. They were building what they call a pattern of life analysis, even for the natural environment. When did the wind shift? When did the ambient noise increase or decrease? When did animal activity suggest the presence of patrols? This patience would have seemed like wasted time to operators from units that emphasize aggressive tempo. To the SAS, it was the foundation of everything that followed. Their movement rate was glacial by the standards of other teams. They covered the 15 kilometers to the objective in approximately 52 hours. Other teams had covered the same distance in less than 20 hours. But movement rate was not the evaluation criterion. Detection was. The SAS prioritized invisibility over speed at every single decision point. When they halted, they did not simply stop and rest. They constructed what they call a lying-up position. This involved thermal screening using natural materials, acoustic isolation from potential sensor locations, visual concealment from all angles including overhead, and positioning that accounted for scent dispersal based on wind patterns. Constructing these positions took time. Occupying them allowed genuine rest without detection risk. The thermal drone that detected the first American team passed over the SAS position twice. It detected nothing. Their route selection was extraordinary. They did not simply choose the path of least resistance. They analyzed the likely sensor placement based on terrain appreciation and selected routes that maximized dead ground, areas invisible to observation from any likely observation position. When they encountered the ridge that defeated the French team, they did not attempt to cross it. They spent 6 hours moving laterally until they found a location where a combination of rock formations and vegetation created a corridor invisible to ground sensors and overhead observation. 6 hours to avoid a 2-minute crossing. That calculation is the essence of SAS stealth doctrine. The stream crossing that compromised the German team was handled entirely differently by the SAS. They identified the stream as an acoustic risk during their initial map study. Their solution was to cross only during periods of elevated ambient noise, specifically timing their crossing to coincide with wind gusts that raised the background noise level above the threshold of acoustic detection. This required patience. It required waiting for appropriate conditions. It required subordinating their timeline to the environment rather than demanding the environment accommodate their timeline. When they reached the close approach to the objective, they slowed even further. The final 500 meters took 11 hours to cover 500 meters. They moved in increments measured in meters per hour. They used every scrap of dead ground. They timed their movements to the patrol patterns they had observed. They became part of the landscape rather than intruders moving through it. The ground surveillance radar that detected the Canadian team was defeated not through technology, but through movement techniques so slow that the radar could not distinguish them from environmental clutter. The intelligence extraction was conducted with the same discipline. The SAS team was inside the compound perimeter for over 2 hours. Other teams had planned to complete the extraction in 15 to 20 minutes. The SAS took longer because they prioritized leaving no indication of their presence. Every object they touched was returned to its original position. Every trace of their movement was obscured. The opposing force did not know the compound had been penetrated until the exercise ended and the SAS team produced the extracted intelligence. The exfiltration demonstrated why the SAS approach is so different from other NATO forces. They did not relax. They did not increase speed. They treated the exfiltration as a completely separate mission requiring the same level of discipline as the infiltration. They assumed the defensive posture had changed. They assumed they were being hunted. They assumed nothing from the infiltration remained valid. This assumption of compromise mentality meant they conducted fresh reconnaissance at every obstacle. They identified the repositioned observation post that caught the second American team and avoided it entirely. They detected the searching drone by its acoustic signature and went to ground until it passed. At hour 71, the SAS team reached their exfiltration point. No detections, no sensor activations, no visual sightings, no acoustic compromises. The opposing force commander admitted in the debrief that he did not believe any team had successfully penetrated the compound until the SAS produced the extracted intelligence. His exact words were, "They were ghosts." Now let me tell you why the SAS succeeded where everyone else failed, because the explanation goes far beyond this single exercise. It goes to the fundamental philosophy of how the Special Air Service approaches covert operations, and that philosophy was forged in circumstances that no modern training program can replicate. The SAS was not created as a direct action unit. It was created as a strategic reconnaissance and sabotage force designed to operate deep behind enemy lines with no possibility of support or extraction. The founding operators in North Africa during World War II knew that detection meant death, not capture, not extraction, death. This reality shaped a doctrine that prioritizes invisibility above all other considerations. After World War II, the SAS conducted extended operations in the Malayan jungle during the emergency. These operations lasted not days but weeks and months. The enemy was elusive and the jungle was unforgiving. The SAS developed techniques for moving through dense vegetation without leaving traces. They learned to become part of the environment rather than intruders within it. These techniques were refined, documented, and passed down through generations of operators. In Borneo during the confrontation with Indonesia, SAS patrols operated across the border in what were technically denied operations. If they were detected, the political consequences would be severe. If they were captured, they would be disavowed. The requirement for absolute stealth was not a training objective, it was an operational necessity. The techniques developed during this period remain classified. What can be said is that SAS patrols conducted thousands of cross-border operations without a single confirmed detection by Indonesian forces.
The Northern Ireland experience added another layer. Operating in urban and rural environments where any compromise could result in ambush, the SAS refined techniques for covert movement and observation that have no parallel in other NATO forces. The requirement to remain invisible while conducting extended surveillance operations produced a generation of operators who understood stealth at an almost intuitive level. This 70-year accumulation of operational experience, each lesson paid for in blood and refined through repetition, produced a stealth doctrine that cannot be replicated in a training program. Other NATO forces have excellent training. They have sophisticated techniques. They have dedicated operators. What they lack is the institutional memory of generations who operated in environments where stealth was survival. The doctrinal difference becomes clear when you examine how different forces train for covert operations. Most NATO special operations units train stealth as a component of mission preparation. You learn camouflage, you learn movement techniques, you learn sensor awareness. These skills are tested in exercises and evaluated against standards. This produces competent operators who understand stealth as a skill set. The SAS approach is fundamentally different. Stealth is not a skill set, it is a mindset. Every aspect of SAS training, from initial selection through specialized courses to operational deployment, reinforces the primacy of remaining undetected. Selection itself includes exercises where candidates must evade trained hunters for extended periods. Those who are found are removed from the course. The message is clear from day one. Invisibility is not optional. Invisibility is existence. This mindset produces different decisions at every level. When the SAS team chose to spend 6 hours finding an alternative route rather than risk a 2-minute crossing, they were not making a tactical calculation. They were expressing an institutional value. Time is always available. Detection is never acceptable. This value is so deeply embedded that it does not require conscious consideration. It is simply how SAS operators think. Contrast this with the approach of forces whose primary mission sets emphasize direct action. These forces are trained to close with and destroy the enemy. Speed, aggression, and violence of action are core values. These values produce extraordinary capabilities in their intended context. But they also produce operators who instinctively want to move faster, cover more ground, complete the mission sooner. In a stealth context, these instincts are liabilities. The American teams in this exercise were not poorly trained. They were trained for different priorities. When faced with a choice between speed and stealth, their training inclined them toward speed. When faced with a choice between an aggressive approach and a patient one, their training inclined them toward aggression. These inclinations were marginal. They were not mistakes in any obvious sense, but in an exercise where the evaluation criterion was 0 detections, marginal inclinations toward speed and aggression accumulated into mission failure. This analysis is not criticism. It is observation. The American Special Operations community produces extraordinary operators, capable of missions that other forces cannot attempt. The balance they have struck between different capabilities reflects their strategic requirements. If you need a force that can conduct a hostage rescue in an urban environment with speed, precision, and overwhelming violence of action, American Tier 1 units are the best in the world. If you need a force that can disappear into an environment for weeks and observe without being observed, different capabilities apply. The real lesson of Exercise Silent Phantom is not that the SAS is better than other NATO forces. The lesson is that specialization produces excellence in specific domains. The SAS has specialized in stealth for 70 years. That specialization produced success in an exercise specifically designed to evaluate stealth. In an exercise designed to evaluate close-quarters combat or maritime interdiction or high-altitude insertion, different units would demonstrate their specialized excellence. What concerns NATO planners is whether the right capabilities exist across the alliance for the full spectrum of potential missions. Modern warfare increasingly favors forces that can operate undetected. Sensor technology makes battlefields transparent. The forces that can remain invisible retain freedom of action. The forces that cannot are fixed, targeted, and destroyed. In this context, the stealth capabilities demonstrated by the SAS become strategically critical. The after-action process from Silent Phantom produced extensive recommendations. Several nations have since increased their emphasis on stealth training. Exchange programs with British forces have expanded. Techniques that were previously closely held have been shared with alliance partners. The goal is not for every NATO force to become identical. The goal is for every NATO force to understand what genuine stealth capability looks like and to develop their own approaches to achieving it. The integration of these lessons takes time. Institutional change in military organizations is measured in decades, not years. The forces that failed in Silent Phantom have not suddenly become incompetent. They have identified areas for improvement and begun the slow work of incorporating new techniques and priorities. This is how professional militaries develop, not through never failing, but through learning from every failure. Let me tell you something about the SAS operators who completed this exercise, because it illustrates the human element behind doctrinal success. In the debrief, they did not celebrate their achievement. They analyzed their own performance with the same critical eye applied to the teams that failed. They identified moments where they could have been detected. They discussed decisions that carried more risk than necessary. They treated success as the minimum standard, not as an achievement worthy of congratulation. When your unit has been conducting these operations for 70 years, when the ghosts of operators who came before watch every exercise, when the standard is set by men who walked behind enemy lines with no support and no extraction, success in a training exercise is not celebration worthy. It is expected. The bar is not passing the exercise. The bar is perfection. This cultural element cannot be replicated through doctrine or training programs. It is transmitted through human contact, through serving alongside operators who embody the standard, through absorption of institutional values over years of immersion. American Special Operations units have their own cultures equally powerful in their domains. The SEAL ethos emphasizes different values equally intensely. These cultures are not interchangeable. They are not better or worse than each other. They are different. The strategic question for NATO is how to ensure the alliance possesses all the cultural capabilities it needs across its member forces. The answer is not homogenization. The answer is integration. When a mission requires stealth, you deploy forces with stealth culture. When a mission requires direct action, you deploy forces with that culture. When a mission requires both, you combine forces and let each contribute their strengths. This is happening. Joint exercises like Silent Phantom are specifically designed to illuminate these differences and create opportunities for American operators who participated in this exercise returned to their units with first-hand experience of what SAS stealth looks like. Some techniques were immediately adoptable. Others required doctrinal review. The process of integration continues. The future of NATO special operations is combined capability. The days of single-nation operations are largely over. Future missions will involve operators from multiple nations working together, each contributing specialized capabilities to achieve objectives that no single nation could accomplish alone. In this model, the SAS stealth capability becomes an alliance asset, deployable where needed, combined with other nations' capabilities to create effects greater than any sum of parts. I want to leave you with a thought about what exercise Silent Phantom reveals about the nature of military excellence. 8 of 9 NATO Special Operations units failed this exercise. All 8 units are extraordinary by any objective measure. All 8 units can accomplish missions that would be impossible for conventional forces. All 8 units represent the pinnacle of their nation's military development. They failed because the exercise tested a specific capability that was not their specialty. This is not embarrassing. This is informative. Every unit that failed learned something invaluable about their own limitations and about the capabilities they need to develop. That learning is worth more than any exercise success. The units that learned the most are the units that will improve the most. If the exercise had tested maritime interdiction, different results would have emerged. If the exercise had tested urban close-quarters combat, different results would have emerged. If the exercise had tested high-altitude high-opening insertion, different results would have emerged. Every unit has domains of excellence and domains of relative weakness. The wise military leverages excellence and mitigates weakness through alliance and integration. The word failed in the title of this video is deliberately provocative. It captures attention. It creates emotional engagement, but it is also misleading in important ways. What happened in exercise Silent Phantom was not failure in any meaningful sense. It was education. It was assessment. It was exactly what training exercises are designed to produce. The units that were detected were not humiliated. They were informed. They now understand, through direct experience, what genuine stealth capability requires. They understand where their doctrine falls short. They understand what they need to develop. This knowledge, purchased through exercise failure rather than combat failure, is invaluable. If you want to understand more about how different elite forces approach specific challenges, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. I am releasing videos every week that analyze real doctrine, real training, and real capabilities. Next week, I am covering why certain NATO forces dominate specific terrain types and what historical factors created these. The week after, I am examining a joint exercise where the results challenged everyone's assumptions about which force was best prepared. You do not want to miss these. I read every comment. Your suggestions directly influence which topics I cover. Share this video with anyone who appreciates genuine analysis of special operations capabilities. Not Hollywood mythology, but real doctrine and real lessons. Remember that invisibility is not equipment. It is not technology. It is not even technique alone. Invisibility is culture. It is institutional memory. It is generations of operators learning from each other what it means to truly disappear. The forces that have this culture succeed in stealth operations. The forces that are developing this culture will succeed in time. The key is honest assessment, continuous learning, and the humility to recognize that no force is best at everything. The SAS walked out of exercise Silent Phantom undetected because 70 years of institutional investment created operators for whom stealth is not a skill but an identity. The other NATO forces learned from their experience and are incorporating those lessons into their own development. That is how alliances grow stronger. That is how military capability evolves. That is why exercises like Silent Phantom matter far beyond determining who wins and who loses. Until next time, remember that the best operators are not the ones who never fail. The best operators are the ones who learn from every experience and constantly push the boundaries of what is possible. The forces that walked out of this exercise having learned something are the forces that will succeed in the missions that matter. Failure in training is success in preparation. That is the lesson of Silent Phantom. That is the lesson of professional military development. That is the truth that every elite force understands.